a lot on the Windwalker. One of the better Windwalker players we have had over the course of this tournament. But kicking things off, 24 Halls of Valor, Sloot, Nagura, let's go.
Hi, Nagura.
Still not checked.
Nope. No, you are not. Both teams are going to get started here off the bat, expecting to see an all-10 mob pull here prior to Heimdall, the first boss. Now, dangerous here is really just, of course, we're not in the Necrotic Affix. We are in the Explosive and Volcanic Affix. Those will be fixed in just a bit for you. So the real danger here comes with babysitting those explosives, as we said, especially when you do these large trash balls. There's already so much to interrupt and look out for that it's easy to get lost and have some bad spawns with some of those orbs.
Yeah, Explosive definitely one of the more difficult affixes to deal with, especially because some classes are just not very good at killing them at all, or they need too many globals to deal with them, and especially in those very, very big pulls, as you said. Skyline D probably has a little bit of a disadvantage because they have those 3 melees, so if the explosives don't spawn close to them, then they have a hard time killing them, and the rest do it also not as good as killing explosive than Holy Paladin is.
But you know what? No problem for Skyline D though here, Nagura, as they destroy that trash right now. 18% on the board for them. They're getting ready to pull Heimdall. A bit of trouble here for Method PogChamp dealing with that dragon. Just didn't get enough cleave off of it, and it started kind of chasing Sebs into the corner where he LOS line of sighted the rest of the mobs. So they're spending a bit of extra time dealing with it. Skyline D has now pulled Heimdall, the first boss, and popped their Bloodlust.
Okay, so we saw the Horn of Valor coming in, everyone dropping really, really low, but they calculated the damage exactly, and we saw Maple just surviving with 5% HP, but nothing happened so far. Of course, they did pop their Bloodlust, and we just see insane amount of damage coming out of this squad here. They probably just want to brute force everything, just going in, stunning everything, and just destroying the trash bags, and the single target damage as well is just crazy for them. Killing
things before they kill you is indeed an excellent strategy for these teams. Skyline D smacking as much damage as they can onto Heimdall, making sure they dodge those whirlwinds, those tornadoes that come out of the Dragon's Breath, as we see a nice view of that here on Method PogChamp side on the left side. Those deal an extremely large amount of nature damage should you come in contact with them, and of course you do constantly have to leapfrog between these 3 lanes, making sure that you're not in the direct breath itself. Eepel does go down on Skyline D. They will be using that Battle Res, and Mayu goes down as well from the Dragon Breath that we were just talking about. They only have 1 Battle Res available to them, and if they want to stick the rest of this fight out, they're going to have to get that healer up. It's just too much damage to heal through that horn.
They actually chose to rest the monk, but I'm not sure if they choose to... Okay, so now they're resting the healer instead. Their healer is probably going to take... They probably just got... Okay, now they have a full team wipe coming in here, so they have to probably just full wipe because they only have 1 battle rest available to them. It's going to take them too long if they have to finish the rest of the fight with only 2 DPS. Even if Maple would take the rest and they don't need the healer, it will still just take them too long.
Yeah, no, it's just not worth it at this point, even with the fact that Heimdall does not actually need to get to 0% to die. He finishes at 10%. This is absolutely devastating for Skyline D, and certainly not the team we're used to seeing out of them in terms of quality and cleanliness of kill. Method PogChamp, it's their match to lose from this point on, as they are finishing up with Heimdall. 25% left before he finishes the fight at that 10% phase.
Yeah, so I'm not sure what Maple died to, but the rest of it just right after he died to the breath, as you said, probably got distracted by one of his teammates dying, tried to battle rest, or he was talking on TeamSpeak. Maybe the call didn't go through where the dragon is coming next, and then they just had a full team wipe. Of course, they also lose their Bloodlust and lose their cooldowns, so not only is it 5 deaths, but it's also a lot of time lost there. But, well, Method PogChamp is already on 20%, so only 10% left to go.
Eepel dipping so low there again, sub 10% for that first turn, no deaths, so we'll have to keep an eye on if they're successful this time around. Heimdall now at 14% for Method PogChamp on the left side of the screen. Finishing up the encounter in just a moment, after which they're going to wait, seeing how the pad is for the Sentinel here. It looks like it will be favorable in a moment as they're waiting for it to get out of the way onto the left side. They will pull that 2 champion pack along with the healer, the Mender, and pull it up to the remaining 6 mobs of trash. Pretty difficult pull coming in here, especially because of the orbs and all the dangerous casts going on from the 2 healers.
Yeah, so they choose, of course, to not pull the Sentinel. The Sentinel has an aura around it, making mobs immune to interrupts, so they choose not to pull it. Also has more HP, of course, than all the other mobs. But this pull especially pretty difficult. You need to coordinate your stance, your AoE stance, your AoE silences, and so on properly to not get any cast through. Of course, there's also Mystics that are doing a heal, and we have the Thunder Callers who are doing a lightning bolt at a random target that does quite a lot of damage if it goes through.
And that's all she wrote for that trash pack, as they absolutely erase everything on the board. Muscle Brought and Dr. J doing immense amounts of AoE damage. Else getting ready to help with some of the pulls here for Sebs as they pull the Sentinel that was patrolling behind them with the other Sentinel. Not too much to worry about when you have 2 Sentinels or 3 Sentinels combined outside of the damage output. There's nothing to interrupt on them. And of course, we also have Dr. J here who can spell steal their shield at 30%. Just saving a bit of time so you don't have to chew through that extra absorb.
Yeah, but only pulling 2 Sentinels without any other trash actually takes quite a long time as they have so much HP. So some other teams choose to pull Sentinels with other packs and just trying to use the Blood Elf Silence to interrupt anyway, because that one actually goes through the interrupt immunity from the Sentinels, or Typhoons and stuff like that work as well. But Team PogChamp here going the same way, just pulling those 2 Sentinels, even though as we can see it takes quite a while to kill them. It's just a safer pull overall.
We do see those spell seals coming out of Dr. J as he does that barrier around him now. All the teams move, or all the players moving out of those charged pulls. Want to make sure you don't get too much damage from those. I think they're maybe perhaps waiting for some of their AoE CDs to come up with that 2 Sentinel pull, which is a bit slower. Now, I wouldn't be shocked to see a pretty substantial pull here from the hallway as they're setting up that Warlock gate, likely for the big pull and for Sebs to be able to get aggro and get out of range of some of those caster mobs.
We actually see an interesting pull here as Sebs went to the right side, pulled all the hallway from the right, while Dr. J got bopped from the Holy Paladin, used his Skystep potion and pulled everything from the left side. So I'm pretty sure they pulled the whole hallway, pulling all those mobs together. Now they need to be very careful with those explosives coming off, but as we see the Mass Grip coming in, the stun coming in, and now Sebs is just kiting while Shelley is slowing them up.
Yeah, so a fair bit of damage coming from those explosives. We have already seen, I believe, that the Lay on Hands was used on Dr. J, and Elsa's used his own bubble. That double forbearance debuff on those 2 players has now dissipated, so they don't have those emergency tools left anymore, but by now the mobs are dead because of the immense amount of damage coming out of the Windwalker and the Fire Mage. So well played by them there. The orbs did leak just a bit, but they were prepared for that, and perhaps it was part of their game plan that, hey, you know what, some of these orbs might go off with the amount of mobs we're pulling off. We just have to focus on surviving here. Skyline D has finally finished off Heimdall, and they too have done that larger pull up the stairs with the first Mystics.
So you can see Mythic PogChamp now on 72% trash, so they pulled the whole hallway, got so much trash percentages, and now they're onto their way to Fenrir, and they dealt pretty well with the explosives. Of course, some of them went through, but as long as there's only 1 or 2 going through, then it's you can just use your defensives and you can survive it, or you can even outrange it if you want to. But yeah, Dr. J, I talked to him a lot, and he said explosive is just his favorite affix because he's so good at dealing with those explosives as a Fire Mage.
So they do go over to Fenrir's side. Pretty common for teams in this tournament that they do that. Well, then again, in the last series, we did see them go to Herja, so it could go either way. But the plan here is that they will deal with Fenrir first, and by the time they get over to Herja on the left side, the 3rd boss, the way they're planning to choose it, they will have that Bloodlust available to them. Skyline D working on some of the hallway trash in one of the Sentinels that we saw earlier. A bit slower even, too, because they're only working on 1 Sentinel, whereas we saw at least 2 pulled by Mythic PogChamp there.
Okay, so we see Mythic PogChamp on Fenrir first phase here. They also pulled one of the trash packs to the boss, as we've seen, was it Free Marcy do it earlier, and actually had a full team wipe there going on, which I believe they pulled one of the bulls, which probably was a mistake because those are actually really, really scary for melee players. So this time around, they only pulled the trash pack without the bull, and everything seems to run smooth for them so far.
Yeah, the bull AoE stomp is absolutely devastating, so no danger here for them. Now, Fenrir is in a 2-phase encounter. It will enter its 2nd phase at 60%. He'll kind of run off licking his wounds, and the rest of the players will have time to do a bit of damage to some of the trash coming up before they re-engage Fenrir at 60%, and he resumes most of his phase 1 abilities and a couple of new extra phase 2 abilities. Skyline D has pulled some more of the hallway, dealing with some more of that trash right now, but they have a fair bit to go. I mean, they're only at 47% trash versus Method's 75%, who's already working on their 2nd boss.
Yeah, Skyline D's trash pulls here in this hallway were significantly smaller, and I could also see how they're struggling with those explosives, as the tank had to kite the mobs, and the melees just had to stay back, killing the explosives, pretty much walking out of melee range to deal with the explosives because there's just no range player. And as I said, a Resident is just slightly worse at killing them compared to a Holy Paladin, so they're struggling a lot with those trash pulls.
And the entire Method PogChamp team, of course, walking on water there, getting over to Fenrir, 2nd area for their pull. Now, keep in mind for those at home, they do have still a bit of trash left in the Herja area, and they only need to get to around 84% in order to be essentially done by the time they reach the 4 Kings upstairs before Skovald. So they don't have too much trash left, which is why they opted to skip most of the dog packs here, needing to only engage one of those hounds before getting back on Fenrir's phase 2.
Yeah, so Fenrir phase 2, he spawns those Vorgans whenever he does an Unholing Blast or whatever, Unholing Howl something, whatever it's called.
There's a howl.
It's a howl. Okay, so he interrupts and he also spawns those Vorgs, as we can see. He also has a Scent of Blood where he fixates one player, as we can see Dr. J being fixated. You usually just need to kite them up. Unless you're a druid, you can just go in Bear Form and attack it instead. But an easy ability to deal with for those players, of course. We also have the leap ability where that we can see right now all 4 players being targeted except the tank. The Fenrir is just jumping around to all those players. They, of course, try to dodge the ability because if you get hit by the leap, it leaves a bleed behind. It just stacks up and does quite a bit of damage. But we saw all 4 players actually manage to dodge as they don't have a debuff on them.
Fenrir down to 35%. This pull is quite doggone for now. Skyline D still working on some of the trash. They have moved over, opposite of what we were saying for Method PogChamp, over to the kind of Herja wing here. They will have their Bloodlust available by the time they hit Herja, but because part of that is because they had the wipe on Heimdall in the first place that set them so far back. So they will engage with Herja, have that Bloodlust available, and then have the option to use it later on Skovald or final boss. For some reason I'm forgetting his name right now. Odin, thank you. So we'll have to see which one they choose to use it on, but for now they will have to deal with Herja first. Bloodlust coming back up soon for PogChamp. Of course they will not use it here, though. They will be saving it for Herja as well.
Yeah, 40 seconds left for Team PogChamp. Of course, they still need to do the trash before Herja, and they need to do those 2 mini-bosses, so they will have a little bit of downtime where they're not going to use this Bloodlust. But overall, you're just going to get 3 Bloodlusts, I believe, in this dungeon anyway. So they can choose if they want to use on Odin, the last one, or on Skovald, after, of course, using it on Herja.
Fenrir leaping around right now. The player's doing well to space out, as every player he does hit with this leap will get a bleed stack applied to them, including any player near their primary target. So you want to make sure you don't get too many of those bleed stacks applied to the players. Method PogChamp now downing Fenrir, getting that water walking up on the team with Path of Frost from the Blood DK and getting ready to move back all the way over to Herja's Hall, which is where Skyline D is right now, finishing up these 2 mini-bosses worth of trash and waiting for Herja to spawn in just a moment.
Yeah, so Herja about to spawn. Of course, Herja, one of the, if not the most difficult boss in this instance to deal with on Tyrannical. They do have their Bloodlust ready. They also have 2 Battle Reses, but they have some squishy classes in their lineup, especially the Monk, of course. But Demon Hunter and Rogue should be able to survive. Also, a Druid has this Bear form to just deal with those Arcing Bolts and those Expel Lights. Usually, you also have Blood DK very good because they have the lead for the Eye of the Storm, which is the big AoE that happens on the lightning side whenever Herja is there. And as we can see, them popping the lead right now, the rest of the Druid just healing up the group. And of course, Demon Hunter has a lot of leads, and Rogue has that Feint to deal with that ability, so they're not even dropping that much here.
Yeah, not too dangerous for them, and that the consumption rather from the Blood DK will be available for every single one. Blood DK getting punted there in the correct direction so that she can start getting empowered by the holy spells and losing some of her nature stacks. Here we will have the holy bounce, as we can see on top of the Monk there, Eepel just beside their Blood DK. It will bounce 3 times before it kind of dissipates and goes away, and we'll have the same Sanctify cast as the trash as well. This one is a bit easier to dodge larger gaps, and she has a bigger hitbox, so even with a 3 melee comp, you are able to kind of stick to her 100% of the time and do the damage. Method PogChamp wasted no time and have already gotten over to Herja's room, pulled the remaining trash on top of the 2 mini-bosses, well handling the explosives as well, just making sure to hide inside of that bubble to reduce the nature damage from that storm by 90%.
This is also a very interesting pull because this trash back here, those shield maidens, they actually do a lot of damage to the tank. But since they do have Shallow with that slow ring, Seps, you can just see him kite in a circle pretty much, not getting hit by those shield maidens at all, only having to deal with the damage from the mini-boss. So it's definitely good for them to have this Warlock to deal with the slow and having the mage killing the explosive.
And just quite a lot of damage coming in for Skyline D. 2 deaths go down. Immediate battle reses on them. They're now down to 0 battle reses. Mayu and Eepel, the rest of Druid and the Windwalker have gone down. They are able to recover. Herja's only halfway through her the fight overall right now. The Rogue has also procced that cheat death, so a bit of instability coming out of the team right now, and they don't have any more mistakes to make as they don't have any battle reses available to them. Method PogChamp has finally pulled Olmir, the other second mini-boss, the holy component of spawning Herja here, and will start cleaving him down on top of Solston. Yeah,
sometimes, as I said, this whole explosive, just a difficult thing for Skyline D to deal with, especially Herja walks from one side to the other. Sometimes she might spawn an explosive while the tank gets knocked on the other side. So the melees follow the boss, and then there's this explosive in the back that no one sees or no one knows how to deal with. And then you get that damage on top of something else like an Expellite or an Arcing Bolt, and it's just so much damage coming in. There's also the combo that sometimes happens, and we see Maple actually dying, so they don't have have a battle rest for him. The boss is on 22% though, so they might be able to finish it, but the less players you are, the more difficult Hersha actually becomes because of all those Expel Lights and Arcing Bolt abilities. If there's less eligible targets, then it's more likely that you get the combo, so Expel Light and Arcing Bolt at the same time. And if you don't have a cooldown for that combo, then it's very likely that you're going to die.
So unfortunately, our resident Windwalker once again is the one that suffers the brunt of the mass amount of damage on Hersha of 24 Tyrannical. They will not be able to get him up as you stated, but Hersha down to 13% now. I think they'll be able to pull it off. They were close enough. They just have to deal with one more nature phase and maybe the remainder of a small punt towards the holy phase, but MGT getting quite a lot of damage there. The rogue on Skyline D doesn't have that cheat death to fall back on, but no problem for them as they all huddle back in the bubble. And between the 4 members left, they have enough survivability during this thunderstorm phase. Method PogChamp has also now pulled Hersha 90% on the board, and they've fought their Bloodlust, which is what they were kind of waiting for it to come up when they went over to Fenrir's side first.
Yeah, so Hersha on 4%, they should be able to finish off this boss without any more deaths, as long as they use their cooldowns properly when they get targeted by those abilities. And of course, Method PogChamp still having that Bloodlust up, doing a lot of damage on the pool here, as we see Muscle Bra doing 3.2 million DPS and Hersha on 70% as well. Now, they do have 2 battle rests as well for Method PogChamp, so in case they have 1 or 2 people dying, they can actually recover. But if there's any more problems, just like Skyline D, then it's going to be difficult.
And we're getting the full screen here for Method PogChamp already as they pop back up, getting ready to be punted over to the nature side for their second round of Thunderstorm. You know, this team has a fair bit of survivability as well in the form. Well, actually, really just Shella. The Warlock has the survivability. The Mage is kind of a one-trick pony in terms of having only that one ice block available to them. So a bit more work needed for Elsrad's side as opposed to Skyline D's, but they have no problem dealing with it. And really, just that Leech is such a crucial component from the Blood DK for every single storm. No problem dealing with that storm, and soon they'll be moving right back over to the Holy side.
Yeah, I can imagine most people here using a lot of defensive legendaries, maybe defensive trinkets for Elsrad as well, maybe using that Fell Shield emitter, especially for this Arcing Bolt that is coming out after that Eye of the Storm, where everyone is pretty low still from that AoE damage. You usually want to use one of those defensive trinkets as a healer on that person gets the Arcing Bolt, or and you want to save that sacrifice usually for the combo, the Arcing Bolt and the Expel Light, in case one of them gets it, or if someone just gets a lot of abilities in a row on them and they're just running out of defensive cooldowns, for example.
And oh man, Hersha just has so much health.
It's a long fight.
And back and forth we go, just like a ping pong match. Right back over to the nature side. Muscle Bra dripping. Well, maybe he's dripping from the storm as well, but dipping quite low there with one of those lightning bolts hitting just as she starts her storm there. No problem for the team to handle again with this storm. I mean, dipping quite low, but it's pretty... Once you get into the kind of gist of the fight, there's no problem dealing with it as long as you have the defensives to deal with it. You do reach a peak of damage on the nature and on the holy side, and as long as you're able to kind of deal with the cap damage every time, you should be able to down her. It's a pretty long fight, and it's a tough one at that.
Yeah, it's one interesting thing to note here in this boss fight is that the Expel Light always targets the person with the most HP first. So that's why we see Elsrad. Of course, as a Holy Paladin, you have a lot of HP. So he always gets the first Expel Light, and the person with the second most HP, which is usually Shella, gets the second Expel Light, and so on. So if you have something that can increase your HP, you can even bait an Expel Light on you if that's what you choose.
Yep, so no problem for them. They finally down Hersha and have all of their trash percent, as we said earlier, available to them, so they don't need to pull any extra trash before moving upstairs to the 4 Kings, which is what they're kind of sprinting and priming to do right now. We see that perg is not available for Sebs, as he did Invispot, if I'm not, yeah, obviously Invispotted. Invispot's right past those 2 Sentinels and right up this beautiful holy bridge on the way to the remaining 2 bosses. But of course, first are the 4 Kings.
So the 4 Kings, the 4 mini bosses, we saw most teams having this one trick where they take the beers from the hallway, and if you throw it at the exact right time, then you can actually engage 2 of the mini bosses at the same time instead of only 1 at the start and 2 at the very end.
Yeah, you do enrage them. I myself too would be quite angry if somebody threw a beer at me. Rob. I'll see that look from the side of your eye. They move upstairs to the Kings right now. Usually you pull the 2 side ones. Each of the Kings has their own kind of special ability, and every time one of them dies, he buffs his brothers with his ability as well. So by the time you get to the 3rd and 4th Kings, they have several abilities from the previous King, some of them including Sever, a huge tank hit, Dagger, of course, on the melee, those ghosts that spawn on the side, the images that if they reach the boss, they will heal them. And the last one that we actually saw a bit of a hiccup on in the last series, which is that AoE cast that you want to make sure is interrupted because it deals a well, obviously a tremendous amount of damage, as we saw firsthand.
Yeah, we actually saw a full team wipe coming out of, I believe, Galtshrotters it was earlier. They still managed to win it, but it was pretty close. They almost threw it because of missing this one interrupt. But here you can see just how important every single ability is in those kind of dungeons. If you feel like it's easy to, it's just one ability you need to interrupt, but there's so many things that you need to coordinate. And if one person just doesn't pay attention for 1 second, or the shot caller makes a wrong call, then it just causes a full team wipe and it costs you so much time.
Yep, so there's the yell getting interrupted on Ranulf, and Haldor follows suit as well. Skull and X marked for them. They want to kind of kill one king at a time. Dealing with 3 at the same time does have the potential to give one of the DPS, as 2 of those daggers could go out at the same time on the wrong target, or the tank can accrue too many of those sever stacks, increasing their damage taken by 20% per stack. The Ancestors trying to kind of close in on the pack here. Ample opportunity for them to also proc some Cephas on these Ancestors on the side with various CC abilities and punts, knockbacks, what have you. Musclebra actually gets smacked right in the face as one of those kings spawn. Unfortunately, Sebs was just not quick enough to pick it up, and it defaulted its first melee swing to Musclebra's face, who did suffer the consequences, but fortunately they do have enough battle reses available and get him right back up.
Yeah, they still have 2 battle reses here. Of course, on the last boss on Odin, you can't actually use your battle reses anymore. So using the battle reses here, even for the mini bosses here, and using the rest of your reses for Skovald is totally fine, as you don't need them or you can't really use them for Odin. And we have Skyline D back on the screen as well. They're on Fenrir now in the second phase on 35%. It seems like they're doing fine so far. Their Bloodlust is actually going to be back up. It's going to be interesting to see if they use it for Fenrir or if they just choose to save it for Skovald later on.
I think they'll probably save it for Skovald. They still have a minute left on it. Fenrir is now at 30%. But Skyline D still looking to make Fenrir go the way of Old Yeller. Method PogChamp over there on the main screen, finishing off the last 2 of the kings, after which they'll incur what is a quite fairly long RP phase, while Skovald comes out quite angry that he is not the selected champion of Odin and will fight you for the Aegis in the middle. Fenrir down now to 20% for Skyline D. They still have to get all the way upstairs, deal with the 4 kings, and then finally get to this RP that we're talking about for Method. So, I mean, Method needs probably 2 wipes here in order for Skyline D to be able to catch up.
Yeah, they're very far behind at this point. It needs a miracle for them to catch up to Method PogChamp here. As we see, the God King Skovald RP, as you said, that takes quite a long time, but the boss itself, when it actually engages, does quite a few difficult abilities that most of the people have to deal with. One of them is this Fellblaze charge, where it targets 1 random player. It can also be the tank, and it charges to that player's position. So usually you want to avoid it because it does quite a lot of damage, especially on plus 24 Tyrannical. But most of the classes that they have here in Method PogChamp probably do have an easy time dodging it, as we have a mage who can just blink out of it. We have Shelle, who does have the portal or the gateway to dodge it. And we also have Musclebra, who just can use his illusion.
Or he can just, eat it to the face and die and then get res. Most monks do these maps. But well blinked there by Dr. J to indeed dodge that first charge. Immediately the shield goes down to deal with the Ragnarok cast coming from Skovald. After this, though, he will be the one to grab the shield from you and cast his own kind of Hellblaze amongst the group that will spawn 3 fire elementals. Now, these spawn on players, which is why you're seeing the players kind of stand near the boss so that you can bait all 3 spawns while still effectively and efficiently cleaving the boss and killing those flames of woe.
You saw Shelle moving out a little bit early there before all the flames spawn, just because sometimes Skovald does a Fellblazing charge right after this shield phase. So you need to make sure that you're very far away as one of those players that needs to use that blink ability or the teleport ability, because if you're very close in melee range, then it's very difficult to dodge.
I was just pointing at the bottom of the screen. I was like, oh, I hope that explosive orb doesn't go off, but the explosive orb does go off at the same time as one of the charges, and the Windwalker died, I told you. The Windwalker does go down, and they use the battle rush. Shelle goes down as well from the charge, I think,
yes.
Which is surprising to see a Warlock die, so, I mean, just one shot from that. Ragnarok goes up again. They have gotten the Aegis and will be using it here to stay safe. No battle reses left, but as you said, on Odin, there is no battle res available to you anyways, because if you die, you actually get carried up to the balcony on that fight. Immediate Fellblaze charge. Well done to pull the trick off by them. You want to pop this Aegis as late as possible once the Ragnarok starts. That way, his next special ability after his Ragnarok, usually a Fellblaze charge, actually gets eaten by the shield too. So it's kind of a freebie for the team.
Yeah, so one difficult thing here to deal with for the Warlock is that his port needs to be placed beforehand, and if it's placed in, if one paddle spawns on top of the portal, it's actually annoying, because if you use your portal, you actually immediately get the tick from the pool on the ground, and it does a lot of damage. It might just, 2 ticks might just kill you, but I wonder why I didn't pull up a gateway preemptively, because the gateway is just a second save way to use in case there's a paddle on top of your portal.
Yeah, maybe he just thought he could eat the damage. I don't know. Maybe just miscalculated there. Muscle Bra getting a fair bit low there again, but they do manage to heal him up. The last Flame of Woe gets killed. Savage Blade well dealt with by Sebs there, making sure he has his active mitigation available to him so that he doesn't incur that extra 20-second bleed. Ragnarok going out again from the boss. Shield popped well laid here. Should be eating the charge if there is one, as we can see the team safely avoids that charge. And once again, Skovald will be grabbing the shield and using it against the team.
Yeah, we see their bloodlust actually coming up in 10 seconds. I would believe they want to save it for the last boss at this point because Skovald is already so low, and I assume none of the players have their cooldowns ready at the moment or want to save it for that extra damage phase on Odin later on. But it should be easy for them to finish off the boss here, even though they don't have any battle rests, so they can't make any more mistakes with those Fell Blaze rushes.
And fortunately, that Fellblaze Rush actually does target Sebs, the tank there, so he's the only one that eats the damage. No problem for a Blood DK to deal with. Shella there is the one target. You could see he well ported that time, making sure to avoid that potential one-shot that hit him earlier. Skovald now down to 4%. Should be no problem for the team to just clean this up in a moment and start the RP for Odin, who will dominantly jump down into the arena, getting ready to face the players in their final test.
So Elsarat here was didn't want to deal with Skovald anymore and just used his bubble on that last Fellblaze Rush just to be safe, as there's going to be a pretty long RP again once Odin jumps down until he can be engaged. And then the boss actually dies at 80%, has a lot of HP, so every percentage is actually quite a bit of HP. It looks like it's just very little, but it's actually quite a bit. As we see Skyline D back on the screen, they're on the mini-buses, so they're on their way to Skovald as well.
I think that was the last one by the looks of it. Yeah, so they're just starting to spawn Skovald, the fight that we just saw Method PogChamp kill. And I mean, a Tyrannical 24 of Skovald, as we saw with Herja, takes a while. I mean, that was a 2-minute fight, something like that. So it's going to be a bit before Skyline D catches up. They're just praying for a wipe for Method PogChamp. And at this point, if you're going to wipe on Odin, it doesn't really matter if you have the battle reses or not, as we mentioned. Odin, I would say, is not nearly as dangerous as Skovald, and especially Herja in terms of one-shot mechanics. Just want to make sure you avoid the holy balls, don't get hit by those, and of course don't stand in his AoE, which takes 1 year to cast. So it's quite simple in that regard, as long as the ad is kept locked down as well in terms of CC, kills, and interrupts.
Yeah, the more spears there are in the room, the more damage the AoE actually does when he shatters the spears. And on higher levels on Tyrannical, it actually does quite a bit of damage, so sometimes people choose to run defensive legendaries. But I believe on 24, it shouldn't be a big deal just to use defensive cooldowns or defensive healing cities coming out of Elsarat, maybe Aura Mastery, for example. And of course, the buff is going to come out any second now, where the players get applied one rune on top of their head, where they have to walk to the rune and they will turn into
a Valkyrie.
A Valkyrie, and they will get a damage.
In this case. A Valkyrie in the kind of World of Warcraft world that we live in. So the Valkyries do give you a 30-second buff for 50% increased damage done and healing done. So this is why you're seeing the Bloodlust be saved until this point, as Nagura mentioned, along with likely everyone's CDs, pots, etc., getting as much of that damage in as possible in Odin, as he does dip below his relative 50% mark, going below the 90%, no longer benefiting from that Sinidaria belt that I would assume Muscle Bra is wearing at the moment to get all that extra damage in.
Yeah, of course, Sinidaria, only one leather wearer here, so only Muscle Bra who can wear that Sinidaria here. We can also see the at that is casting that surge that needs to be interrupted, but they're dealing with it quite well. Of course, they also have 2 ranged interrupts, one from Dr. J and one from Shelle, and if they don't have any interrupt ready, then the Seps can just either grip it or range stun it, so they shouldn't have a problem dealing with that at all, and the boss is 5% left at this point.
Yeah, I mean, it's just Blood DK is just so good for dealing with that ad, that and Prop Paladins, but I don't even know what the other tanks are called anymore because all these Blood DKs in this competition, they're just so strong. The Obliterator does go down, and Odin is now counting his last numbers. About 2.5% left on Odin. I believe exactly at 80.5%, if I'm not mistaken, is when we go over. Of course, we don't have the luxury of that decimal place there. Dr. J getting a bit of damage on him, but nothing too dangerous there. Gets healed back up from that 24% state, and Odin will be going down, allowing Method PogChamp to claim the first map. Rob?
I was waiting for it to happen.
You look just shocked.
Give the god his moment. Salute, stay in your lane. I will jump in when Descos is appropriate. But yeah.
Oh, no, it wasn't a Descos that you just looked perplexed. I wanted to make sure you're okay.
Again, I was just... Dr. J, what an excitable young mage. Gotta say, though, that one was pretty one-sided. Right from the get-go, really, we kind of saw that Method PogChamp's new lease on life of let's just take it slowly, let's not overpull, let's not freak out, really paying dividends there. Not so for Skyline D. We saw them have a really bad run-in early, and this is a fairly one-sided game, which we'll dive into a little bit more deeply after the break. But any initial impressions from that one?
This is not the Skyline D we know. It's weird. It's once that first wipe happened, which is very uncharacteristic of them in the first place. It seems like they just kind of gave up. Like, they kind of lost it. They just maybe said, you know, we'll try to reverse sweep, whatever it may be. But it just didn't seem like the team we know that we've seen in the regionals and in this finals.
Yeah, certainly an early advantage for Method. PogChamp, certainly the favorite coming into the series. Find out a little bit more about what went down in that first map right after this. We've had some incredible neck-and-neck races over the course of today, and this was not one of them. Let's get into why this was not one of them. Sours, right from the get-go, right up to Himdall, first boss. What went wrong here for Skyline D?
Well, obviously a full team wipe went wrong. We do have a clip prepared for what just went wrong. We would like to get into that to see, like the death there is really uncharacteristic from these guys. It's not something that we expect to see after all of their clean play in the previous series. You see, what happens is Eepel, or Maple, as that his name is, he gets hit by the frontal cleave from Heimdall. You see, right after that cleave goes off, he's on the ground, and then whenever a teammate dies, you might get a little bit distracted and then lose track of yourself, and then everything just starts to spiral out of control there. And so we're going to take one more closer look at this, just what quite happened. So we can see Heimdall's in the air, and what's happened is our tank has gone. He started in one spot, and then he has rotated just a little bit, and now this giant frontal cone that Heimdall is going to cleave onto the ground just so happens that it's going to pick off that monk. He was just maybe a little bit too eager, moved a little bit forward. That's not really, it's not something that we expect to see. You can see just how close those two players are in front of the boss as he's, jumped into the air. Him and Heimdall, of course, is LeBron as he comes down and dunks hard on this monk and then sets these guys way just way behind the other team.
This was pretty much game one of the NBA Finals between LeBron and the Warriors. He was just 1v5ing, 360 windmills slamming. It was not pretty. And as you said, Skyline D is kind of a team that we've known to take it a little more slowly, be a little bit more creative in their compositions, a little more conservative in their pulls. That helps them stay alive. And traditionally what we were kind of seeing as being their weakness was speed. And I kind of wonder if at this stage they're kind of just throwing abandon to the wind and just saying like, hey, we've got to go. We've got to get this time. That's what all the teams have been harping on. Nagura, is that something you think may be the cause of this here?
To be fair, if you think about it, even if they wouldn't have had this full team wipe, I'm not sure how much it affected them with the nerfs and everything, but even afterwards, when we saw the pulls, the trash pulls coming out of Skyline D, it was just a lot slower and a lot smaller than Mythic PogChamp. So I feel like even without that wipe, I think they still would have been slower. So this clean play coming out of Skyline D still just needs fails from the other teams if they're doing bigger pulls. So the other team needs to make mistakes if Skyline D wants to do this safe way.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about the trash right after Heimdall for Mythic PogChamp, because they also went at that like fairly conservatively, right? They're clearly really respecting the map, the affixes, the danger here, and I think they have a good understanding that, as you were saying, Nagura, if they play their way and they don't play overly recklessly, they'll probably just win.
Yeah, so it was really good how they handled that pull. When we saw Free Marzi do it, maybe got a little bit too overeager. We see that Skyline D has chosen that they are going to the lower Karazhan, and I believe Nagura and Sloot, you guys were talking to Dr. J specifically about how much they love this dungeon.
Yeah, so Dr. J I believe it actually would be their counter pick as well, which is very unfortunate for Skyline D, because Lower Karazhan is this one dungeon that has explosive as an affix, and usually people shy away from Lower Karazhan if there is explosive because there's so many big trash pulls where explosive is going to be a very big problem. And I just talked about how bad the Skyline D's comp is for explosive because they have that triple melee and they have the Rastadroid compared to the Holy Paladin. So I think it's actually really surprising to me why they picked this Lower Karazhan here.
Yeah, I mean, you said it completely. She said everything I wanted to say. We both talked to Jay about this, and this is one of their fave map picks, and I know he likes it personally because he gets to spread his Mass Ignite everywhere in that dungeon, but it's going to be, I think, pretty costly. Neither team is, I would say, the best for dealing with the explosives in the dungeon, and there will be a bit of RNG into how many of the orbs spawn from those mass trash pack pulls. We'll see if PogChamp has a kind of different pull order in mind compared to what we've seen them do in the regionals, but this might end up really hurting Skyline because this is certainly not a weakness map that PogChamp feels.
Right, and we saw so much of Lower Karazhan, obviously, throughout the time trials, even just coming into the regional weekend. So this is a map that teams have had a lot of practice on, and as we were just saying, if you compare these two teams and they're both set from the same starting point playing their exact game, it always seems like it favors, at least in this particular series, Mythic PogChamp. So I'm curious to see what kind of curveballs we can expect coming in from Skyline D, because as you all were saying, there is a certain introduction element of chaos into this when you start adding explosives with the traditionally large pulls you make.
And of course, it's also the Tyrannical here in Lower Karazhan, and we know just how much Jack loves to talk about the Paladin trick that's available on Moros in Lower Karazhan that isn't available for Skyline D, who has the Resto Druid healer. So there's a lot of questions going as to perhaps why they've chosen this dungeon. We were talking before the game how we thought that Vault of the Wardens might have been a good pick for Skyline D, but this Lower Karazhan pick, perhaps they've got something really prepared here. We saw this a lot in the regionals. Some of the EU times in this dungeon in the regionals were really scary with some huge pulls, but with these affixes here in the 24 setting, it's going to be a whole new dungeon.
Yeah, certainly stuff to watch out. And I just want to point out, I feel like we always just somehow get back to talking about Jack. I feel like we always just miss him on this desk, and Jack, wherever you are, because I obviously have no idea. We miss you. But we're going to hop into this game. Skyline D needs to win this to stay alive. They need to stay alive for not only themselves, for China as well. Will Method PogChamp be able to close it out?
Well, listen, Rob, I know we might be bald brothers, but kind of speak for yourself with the missing Jack card, all right? I'm good with Nagura now. I've gotten used to it at this point. Method PogChamp and Skyline D getting ready to go head-on-head here in Lower Karazhan. Immediate kind of control undead as we see from both Blood DKs as they run up. That just one spirit is so inefficient to just DPS and cleave down alone. So the advantage of the Blood DK here amongst many others as they lead the charge up on top of the balcony.
Yeah, also all the rest of the trash here, not only is it pretty difficult to deal with, especially for the tanks because of this throw coin ability that does a lot of damage, but it also gives very little percentage. So we see most of the teams just keeping it, as we see Elserad and Mio with the rest of them just stealthing through. First of all, triggering this event because it is quite a long RP before you can actually engage the boss fight, and then he goes back, probably mass resting the rest of the team, or if they choose to do another way, maybe just go past it another way.
Yeah, so, you know, like the RP for this event is very long. It's usually a minute, something like that, depending on which one we have, which we'll have to see in a moment. Here's the mass stealth coming out of Skyline D. So they do have that advantage in the Rogue, opting not to get as many deaths on the board. In fact, they pull some of the trash together using that mass stealth, get rid of it, clean it up, and then we'll continue on to the Opera event without incurring any of those deaths. Method PogChamp still working on some of that trash. Whether or not they decide to do the wipe, we'll see. I doubt they will by this point because Elserad has already returned back to the group and is already healing as opposed to sitting in a faraway position getting ready to heal, and rightfully so, as they have already cleared what they need to clear and will be heading down to that Opera area.
Yeah, we actually saw Method PogChamp do a quite big pull there. They also released the spirit and killed the spirit off, while Skyline D is killing the spirit on the way to this event here. And as we've seen, some explosives actually going off for Method PogChamp and the whole group almost dying, everyone dropping really low. That's the danger of explosive here if you pull those big trash groups together.
Yeah, no problem ultimately for them. MGT did proc his cheat death from that spirit that they're cleaning up as the last of that RP starts. And we, of course, then we are back to the, I believe, Beauty and the Beast event here with the cauldron and all of the various kitchen appliances, which aren't actually kitchen appliances because there's brooms and all that kind of weird stuff. But here, as soon as you kill one of the mobs, everything else will heal back up to 100% health. So you want to make sure you're killing the highest priority targets. In most situations for the groups, it's Mrs. Cauldrons, as she will constantly do a lot of damage with her soup spray onto the group and does have that AoE that denies a fair bit of area denial. Of course, the Oven, who I always forget his name for some reason, is completely invulnerable until you kill the first three. Coggleston, there we go, now I remember.
And then we see, of course, Bablet here, the broom that fixates on a random player. If Bablet actually walks through the fire on the floor, then it gains speed. So you don't want to cut it through the fire, and you also want to get rid of the fire with one of the debuffs that gets applied to you. You just walk through the fire and you actually get rid of it. So we can see the room actually being pretty clean for Method PogChamp here, and we can see Dr. J kiting Bablet around.
Of course, I don't explain there's a broom. Method PogChamp dealing over with Luminor now, after which Bablet will, of course, heal to full. So a lot of the damage that comes out, as long as it's buffing their single target, is efficient. But a lot of, for instance, the spread ignite damage from Jay is really quite lost on this fight until we get to the Coggleston phase where he will spawn some forks. MGT dipping quite low there. Doesn't have the safety of that cheat death available to him, so they'll have to keep an eye on him and make sure they get that health up. But Skyline D having killed Mrs. Cauldrons first as well, and now working on Luminor.
Yeah, so we actually can see a lot of explosives spawning here in this boss fight because there's so many mobs, especially in a very pool, and explosives also spawn explosives themselves, so you can be a little bit unlucky with explosives. It's a little bit of an RNG affix, but we can see both teams actually dealing quite well with the explosives as well. And one thing to note is that Skyline D actually did not use the Bloodlust, so I wonder if they want to do a very big pull just right after this event here.
Yeah, that is interesting because most teams kind of want to get that Bloodlust rolling right away just to make sure they get maximum output out of it over the course of the dungeon. So as long as they're not missing the entirety of a Bloodlust later in the dungeon, we'll see exactly what they have planned as they start working on Bablet, the broom, the last mob that they need before Coggleston access, which Method PogChamp on the left side of the screen has now gotten access to. Now, Coggleston will cast a debuff on the tank that makes their damage taken increase by, I believe, 75%, and also will spawn some silverware on the side, which is not very nice as it tries to stab you in the eyeballs. He will also cast a buff that increases their haste by, I think, 100%, something like that, quite a fair bit, and I believe the mage can actually spell steal that buff, if I'm not mistaken, so a nice benefit for Dr. J in this case.
Yeah, and so Team PogChamp actually quite a bit ahead at this point as they're working on Cobblestone, while Skyline D is still working on Bellblade and then have to kill Cobblestone. Of course, they're missing this Bloodlust, which is very interesting. It will be interesting to see where they use the Bloodlust, because Mythic PogChamp already on 7 minutes, so already 3 minutes of Bloodlust debuff duration is gone. So as you said, if they're not losing one whole Bloodlust duration, then it might just be the tactic that they chose to do.
And Seb's just kiting just a bit there. He did have 3 of those bleed debuffs from the silver forks that are out. There's a fair bit of them on the arena right now, but nonetheless, Cobblestone does die. And here we see a really huge pull typically from teams coming in, as they'll often pull this backstage access, which they have access to rather, all the way downstairs into the understage. Looks like they're playing it a bit safer just because of the sheer danger of explosives in this scenario. So they're only doing the backstage first, and then they will move under the stage. Skyline D only at 35% now on Cobblestone.
Yeah, explosive is very dangerous on those big pulls, and most of the pulls in lower Karasan are very big pulls because the mobs don't tend to have that much HP, but there's just a lot of them. And most of the mobs are actually pretty dangerous as well, especially the group that he's pulling here, Sebs, right now, because if one of those casts goes through, it actually means that it's a group wipe, so you need to coordinate your AoE stuns, your AoE interrupts, and your Blood Elf silences properly, and you need to make sure that they actually die pretty fast, as we can see here.
A lot of those orbs go off, turning some of those members into the Phantom of the Opera as they release and start to head back through the backstage, but a lot of them have gone up, so it looks like maybe Reigns will just be opting to get himself killed so that they can release and go in the direction of Morose, which is oftentimes how we see teams try to recover. Perhaps it was completely planned by them in this case, we'll see, because I didn't really see an effort to actually kill those orbs. It's not like they were doing much after Cobblestone died. Mythic PogChamp here pulling all of these ushers right now, which you do have to turn around for their flashlight spell, as it will deal double damage and disorient you if you do not have your back turned.
Okay, so there might be an interesting strat coming out of Skyline D. As you said, they died on purpose and chose to go to Morose instead. Maybe they're saving this Bloodlust because they're going to pull the Morose. I doubt they're going to pull it with the Trash together, because they obviously need to see. We see a lot of explosives coming out here for Skyline D.
Yeah, that's a lot of damage coming up, as Maple does go down, unfortunately, with a lot of that residual damage from some of those orbs going out. Might have gotten hit by one of the Swirlies or a melee as well, as that was a pretty substantial pull. He does release and will be rejoining his team in just a moment. 6 deaths on the board for them. Mythic PogChamp still clean at the 0%, the 0 death mark, excuse me. They're doing a similarly large pull, a bit slower though. They're choosing not to pull the second half of this room, trying to kind of respect just how dangerous some of those orb spawns can be.
Yeah, they chose to pull one of those phantom guest groups out of the hallway outstairs, and now they're going to pull the rest of it. But yeah, Musclebra died here, of course. Both of the monks died on this pull. What a surprise.
Musclebra died here, of course. As if we were expecting this tragedy to happen for the Windwalkers. They do start to clean up the rest of the room and making sure that these Arcane Warden Swirlies, which are the more damaging ability, if I'm not mistaken. The circles that go around the players do a fair bit of damage, nothing too dangerous, but the Swirlies do a fair, substantial amount of damage onto the players.
Usually teams choose to wait for the Bloodlust timer to come back up before they go Morose, because it is quite a difficult boss to deal with, especially on Tyrannical. But Skyline D did save their Bloodlust, so they actually choose to pull Morose right now. You can see them throwing out the CC here. Well, I'm not sure if Mythic PogChamp chooses to do some trash to get their Bloodlust back up, or if they choose to do Morose without their Bloodlust ready.
So they opted to not CC Druger, who jumps and whirlwinds at one of the ranged targets. As we can see, it seems like they're actually trying to DPS him down first. And of course, Ference as well, who was the one that does that huge holy frontal. Now, that frontal cannot be interrupted by ordinary means, but you can punt it and displace him prior to him doing it and getting it off to save the potential damage and devastation that it might do. The bigger problem here is that they have to make sure exactly where they're choosing to fight this boss. As we can see, orbs do spawn on top of the stage from the 2 CC'd members, so you want to make sure that your LOS or line of sight from them via the stage.
Yeah, so if you stand right in front of the stage, as you said, then those explosives actually hit you. As we saw at the very start, Skyline D pulled it and 2 explosives spawned, and they actually got hit by it and almost died. And then the tank Reigns tanked it to the left side, and now they're line of sight to the mobs. But Elstrad on the Holy Paladin compared to the rest of it here on this boss actually matters quite a bit because of this one ability that Morose says, which is called Garrode. We can see on Mythic PogChamp's side, no one has the Garrode debuff on them, while on Skyline D, 4 people already have the debuff, because Mio, as as a wrestler, you just do not have any immunity, and if no one on your team has the growth debuff on you, then Morose is going to cast it on the healer 100% of the time. So Elsrat, as a Holy Paladin, can just immune the debuff of himself, and then he will get another debuff, thus delaying all the debuffs on the rest of his team, as we can just see him immune it off right now.
That's a huge advantage, Nagura, especially in this tyrannical setting. As we mentioned, the entire team is currently debuffed for Skyline D. Those HOTS will only get you so far from the rest of Druid, and Morose is still at 76% for Skyline D, as they're kind of dealing with the last two guests. Everyone's barely hanging on right now. Miyu's going to run out of mana easily at this point, or just people are going to start flopping over, as the second stack, and of course these do stack, the second stack of Growth does go on Maple. Unfortunately, the Windwalker in the group at this point, not the most survivable character of some of the options that are available to the team. So we'll have to keep an eye on them, but they are trying to kind of finish off Mills. Actually, I believe they're going to ignore Millstrip and just go for the Morose kill at this point, as long as just interrupting her on the side, making sure none of those leak. PogChamp already at 50% on Morose, and I believe they're ignoring two of the guests, which is why they've already pushed ahead in boss damage. Yeah,
so we see everything falling apart here for Skyline D, as two of the members die. They have two battle rests ready, so they can get them back up. Sometimes it might actually be intended to let people die, because the Garrote debuff actually gets removed. So sometimes to save healers' mana, you just let someone who has 2 stacks die and rest them back up if you have a lot of battle rests ready, just to preserve the mana, because this is a long fight. And as we can see, Morose still on 45% for Skyline D, and Mio is already really low on mana here.
And it's only now that Method PogChamp is really starting to feel the brunt of those Garrotes. Finally, 3 members have them, but Morose is already at 22% at this phase. It's really not that much danger by the time it starts to ramp out of control, much like it did for Skyline D earlier. Once again, Skyline D has the entirety of the team with the Growth debuffs. Purgatory is already procced, and Cheat Death is not available for them either, so everybody quite vulnerable on that side. Morose now dipping to 10% in just a moment here for Method PogChamp, who didn't even use their Bloodlust on this.
Yeah, without Bloodlust, they just seem to have a lot more boss damage, or maybe something went wrong with the boss damage on Skyline D's side, but they're struggling a lot. The boss is still on 21% HP, and we can see the wrestler just struggling so much with his mana, probably running out of healing cooldowns as well, as they just... thankfully, they got this double stack on the Demon Hunter, who has a lot of leech and can heal himself up, but it's just looking very grim for them on this boss fight here.
Method PogChamp downing Morose and saddling up to move over to the stable area for Adaman, which is, well, not the final, it can be the final boss of the dungeon. They, of course, still have to deal with Maiden later, so they're opting to deal with Adaman first. We typically see huge pulls come out of this room, the danger, of course, being not only the charge from these spectral chargers, but the massive amount of orbs that could spawn with such a large pull. So we're going to have to be careful here. Now, they do have that kind of comfort of the wall through that doorway there, where they can LOS if needed for the orbs, but this is a pretty sizable pull here in the middle of the room for the group.
Yeah, we actually see Skyline D doing something interesting. So they used their Shroud, walking through the kitchen, and now they're going to jump down to Ataman. And I'm not sure if they're going to pull the whole room, because explosive is a big problem here. As you see, someone die.
He must have just not gotten far enough during the Shroud, but they will res him in a moment. It's not uncommon to see this pull. We've seen it in some of the other teams, just mass pull into the middle of the room. I don't remember if there was explosive, though, there. So it's going to be pretty dangerous. Though, don't pull Adaman. Adaman, of course, if you do pull him in the middle of the room, for those at home, he will automatically aggro everything in this stable area, and it's just kind of a disaster as a result, because of all the orbs that are just about to go off here and perhaps kill some of the members as Mayu does go down, and a lot of these orbs are just completely unstable right now, managing to catch up barely here. One more orb goes off, no other deaths, but they're opting not to release. Mayu rather is opting not to release, even though he can re-stealth back to the group, as they will be able to just res him quickly here.
Yeah, they're probably going to put a Paladin down, as we can see here, resting up the rest of it. Thankfully, there was no more explosive going through, because, of course, without the healer, it would have been difficult for them to deal with. But, yeah, all those pulls are very difficult, as we talked about it all the time. Just this explosive, just a difficult affix for Skyline D to deal with. And still very surprising to me that they chose to pick this map. Maybe they just thought that no one else is going to practice this, because who would be crazy enough to counterpick a lower Karasam with explosive? But apparently, Method PogChamp is one of those teams that actually practice this map, as they're doing really well with only 1 death so far.
And it seems Skyline D has indeed been debated in this scenario. Method PogChamp using the time warp for the group, the Bloodlust. Of course, you still see a timer there, because Dr. J's is not available to him yet, as he does have the ring on and will have his own Bloodlust later, as he benefited from the double Bloodlust earlier in the map at Opera, of course, where they used their first one. Now that Adaman is dismounted from Midnight, once he gets to, I believe, 20%, I can't exactly remember the threshold, he will not remount Midnight once she reaches his 100%, which he does here. So he will pony back up and get ready for kind of an altered phase 1 here, where a lot of these spectral chargers will spawn at a set distance from the boss, which is why you're seeing the team kind of stick with the boss to make sure that none of the spectral charges accidentally spawn right on top of you. And that can happen to you as a range. You can get caught like that, Nagura.
Yeah, there's an extra ability as well, which is a magic debuff that gets applied to all 5, as we can see right here. One of the players needs to determine who has the proper debuff that needs to be dispelled, so all of the 5 getting removed. We see on Skyline actually 1 death coming out as they pulled the boss with some of the trash. They do not have a battle rest, and it's their healer that died, who is killing most of the explosives. As we can see, the melee is just trying to kill the explosives that are spawning all over the place as their healer is dead. They're resetting the boss at this moment because they know they can't finish the boss without their healer.
Yeah, I mean, you need that dispel for exactly the magic debuff that you were just talking about for Method PogChamp right now. Method PogChamp does resume their phase 2 right now on Adaman, who dismounts once again, getting ready to dip him below that threshold and make sure to finish him off before Midnight reaches that 100% health again. Upon doing so, Midnight really not too dangerous after that, just has 100% damage taken and damage done buff, so it's really just the AoE stomp that could do a fair bit of damage. But I think in the 24 setting, as long as everyone's topped off, it should be okay.
You can also just line of sight the stomp, so sometimes we can see the tanks just pulling Midnight to one of those sides, and whenever he casts the stomp, they just use the line of sight, and ranged can outranged as well, as we see Alcerat and Musselbra actually drop pretty low from that stomp, but they manage to survive, and the boss should be going down at this point. We also see the trash percentage difference is crazy right now, as Method PogChamp is on 74% in comparison to Skyline on 42, so they are on the same boss fight, but the trash difference, especially in lower Karasan, is at 30% is quite a lot.
Yeah, I mean, it just reiterates what you said earlier. There's a ton of trash in here with not much health, and as a result, it really doesn't reward that much percent because a lot of it scales with the difficulty of the trash mobs that we know in these Mythic Plus dungeons. So it looks like Method PogChamp will kind of do a bit of a backdoor strat here that we've seen some teams do, going through this underground area, which some players don't even know exists, actually. It's funny talking to some of these teams, and this spider area is just quite unknown to some people, especially if you didn't play back when Karazhan was the current dungeon, or a raid rather, back in Burning Crusade. But they will be pulling some of these spiders, and it does provide a pathway up to the hallway for Maiden, which will be their last boss. And I assume what they're going to do is have just enough perfect amount of trash percentage to pull almost everything that needs to be pulled into Maiden's room, only 9% left, and then deal with Maiden.
I believe they're going to skip a lot of that trash because it is quite difficult to deal with because it's so spread out, and there's a lot of hunters that don't really like moving, and they have a lot of cleave damage, not really spread out damage, so they might just skip a lot of that trash. And this spider pull, actually, it looked really easy when they did it, but it's actually pretty difficult as the tank needs to kite those spiders immediately, and no one can stand in front of the spiders because they cast a web spray that will just one-shot anyone who's in front of them. So we saw Saps just using that Sky Step and getting away as soon as he mass gripped them all together. And
of course, we see a good view here of Musselbra's transmog, those hot short shorts based off of Jack's real life wear. But they do move over here into the hallway leading up to Maiden. Will likely get their 100% or most of it here. And then you're right, I think they'll try to opt to skip as much as they can with an invis pod into Maiden's room, because there are some quite dangerous portions of the trash, regardless that they're spread out, where that you could just get one shot with some of those kiss curse dynamics to the trash.
Yeah, so they trying to get the last percentage here. They can, in theory, pull some of the trash to the last boss, but as I said, it's explosive and it's dangerous, so they might just choose to get the 100%, be safe, use that Invis Potion, and because it is the last boss that they have to kill, the Invis Potion is not going to cost you that much because, of course, if you use an Invis Potion, then you have a 10-minute cooldown on all your other potions, so it will cost you quite a bit of damage if you have to use it in the middle of a dungeon, but since they use it at the end of the dungeon, it's not going to cost them that much.
And it looks like they pull the last 2 sentries in the room. One of them does get controlled by Sevs, the DK, who can control undead, similar to the spirit that we saw at the beginning of the dungeon. This last sentry will be their last 2% that they need. I think it'll give them 2%. If not, of course, they could just release the second one. And will largely be used, of course, to proc some Cephas for the team, getting that extra damage. And now Maiden, being the last boss they're choosing to do in here, does have a Holy Bolt that you want interrupted on the tank, else they take permanent increased holy damage for the fight. But really the main mechanic Nagura comes here with that Consecrate.
Yeah, the Consecrate is on one of the players that we saw. Dr. J put it on the left side here. You can see the puddle on the floor. She will cast Repentance at some point in the fight, and you need to have you need to get some sort of damage on you to get out of that CC. Usually what players do is walk into the Consecrate to get the debuff on them. It's a ticking debuff, so once the Repentance comes out, they actually get rid of it because of this damaging debuff on them. There's some tricks you can do with, depending on affix, you can leave an explosive up, for example, let the explosive explode, and then you would get out of it as well. But Elsewhere can easily deal with the debuff, so everyone just chooses to get the Consecrate debuff.
Yeah, so you want to make sure, sometimes the tank, oftentimes the tank wants to make sure that they either pre-MS or pre-taunt before this happens, as Maiden can turn around and smack someone else in the group, something no one should ever do, but it can happen. So once that happens, the tank ensures that they have aggro on them. None of the other members of the group will fall down as a result or get hit. At this DPS pace, we're probably looking at one more Consecrate phase. It takes an extremely high key at Tyrannical to deal with any sort of threat in the room about running out of space. So they should be able to comfortably clean that up. It looks like just a bit more trouble for Skyline D as well, as they are finally cleaning up Midnight and Adamant Fight at 20% just on Midnight, but with another death on the board.
Yeah, one death. They don't. Their battle rest is going to come up any second now, but they're just so far behind at this point. Not only are they one boss behind, but they're also 58% behind. So just. Yeah, I'm not sure why they picked this map. Like, I didn't see any special strat coming out from Skyline D here, but maybe they just thought it's a comfortable map. We practice it a lot. Maybe something went wrong. Maybe the mindset from the first map. Maybe they just hoped to win the first map. But yeah, Mythic PogChamp very convincing here. Pretty flawless run as well. They only have one death. Having 99% here, they're going to release this last sentry, which is about to die. And perfect percentage, perfect run by Mythic PogChamp here.
Yeah, just a couple of hiccups here and there on Morose. You know, they did have Muscle Bra go down, but overall a really flawless run. And I mean, it shows. You know, they said this is one of their strong maps that they want to either counterpick other teams with. And I mean, it just kind of fell right into their lap. And I mean, they just stormed the series, double full screen.
With that, China's hopes of having a team